For as long as humanity has gazed upon the sea, it has wondered what lies beneath. The surface of the ocean, gleaming and restless, conceals a world vast, dark, and unknowable, a place where light fades, pressure grows, and silence reigns. For millennia, the deep remained the final frontier, the one realm still immune to human conquest. Yet even in ancient times, a question persisted in the minds of dreamers and inventors. Could a man build a ship that travels beneath the waves? The idea of an underwater vessel has haunted human imagination for centuries. In myths and stories, it was always the realm of gods and monsters, of Leviathan, of Poseidon's chariot, of Jules Verne's Nautilus, gliding silently through eternal night. To descend beneath the surface was to cross into the forbidden, a place of both wonder and terror. And yet, the ocean's pull was irresistible. Where sailors once sought to master the winds, a new generation of visionaries sought to master the depths. The submarine began not as a weapon, but as a dream. The dream of invisibility, of exploration, of safety in an element that offered none. It was the perfect paradox, a machine designed to sink, not float, to vanish beneath the waves and yet to survive. In an age of sails and wooden hulls, the very thought seemed heretical and impossible. But imagination has a way of turning heresy into progress. The journey from fantasy to reality would take centuries. It would pass through the hands of artists and engineers, alchemists and adventurers. Each would add a piece to the puzzle, a sketch here, an experiment there, a failed prototype that paved the way for success. The evolution of the submarine was not a single leap, but a long descent, a slow, steady journey downward into both the ocean and the human mind. And when at last the dream became real, it changed everything. The submarine would redefine war, revolutionize exploration, and challenge humanity's relationship with the sea itself. It would become a symbol of both courage and dread, the unseen hunter, the silent guardian, the ghost below. This is the story of how that dream began, how the first submarines emerged from myth and imagination to become the most mysterious and powerful ships ever built. It is a tale of visionaries who defied the impossible, of machines that breathed underwater, and of the endless human desire to go deeper, farther, and beyond the reach of light. The age of the submarine was not born overnight. It began as a whisper in the tide, a fantasy drawn on parchment, a spark in the mind of a genius. And from that spark, over centuries of trial and terror, would emerge the silent fleet that rules the depths today. Long before the submarine became a vessel of steel and shadow, it existed only in the human imagination. The dream of traveling beneath the surface of the sea, of moving unseen through the quiet world below, haunted the minds of inventors and thinkers for centuries. To those who lived in the age of sail, the ocean was a living thing, vast and untamable. But to a handful of visionaries, it was also a door, a barrier waiting to be crossed. The visionaries of the Renaissance. In the late 15th century, a man named Leonardo da Vinci, painter, anatomist, engineer, and dreamer, began sketching designs that no one had dared to imagine. Among his notebooks, filled with flying machines and armored vehicles, was a strange concept, a vessel that could move beneath the water, propelled by hidden mechanisms invisible to the eye. He never built it. Perhaps he feared what it might unleash, for Leonardo himself wrote that he withheld certain designs because men are evil and would use them to destroy one another. His drawings showed early understandings of water pressure, buoyancy, and air supply, ideas far ahead of their time. In his mind, the submarine was not merely a weapon, but an instrument of exploration. It was a way to see the unseen, to walk among the mysteries of the sea without fear. Yet the world of the Renaissance was not ready for such a vision. The materials, the engines, even the courage to descend into the unknown, all were still centuries away. From idea to experiment, the centuries that followed saw brief sparks of experimentation, each one a step closer to reality. In 1578, an English mathematician and inventor named William Bourne proposed the first practical design for a submersible craft. His concept was a wooden frame covered in waterproof leather, capable of contracting and expanding its volume to dive and surface. Bourne lacked the means to build it, but his notes revealed a deep understanding of one essential truth. A ship could dive not by magic, but by manipulating the balance between air and water. The first to bring that concept to life was Cornelis Drebbel, a Dutch inventor serving in the court of King James I of England. In 1620, on the River Thames, Drebbel achieved what had been thought impossible. He built a small boat, covered in greased leather, reinforced with wooden ribs and propelled by oars that extended through tight-fitting sleeves. Inside, a crew of 12 men rowed in the dark, guided only by Drebbel's voice. When the oars moved, the vessel sank beneath the river's surface, disappearing into the brown water. Witnesses on the banks were stunned. The vessel remained submerged for nearly 3 hours, emerging downstream to the astonishment of onlookers. King James himself was said to have watched one of the tests, marveling at the sight of a ship that could vanish and reappear. Though crude and fragile, Drebbel's submersible was the world's first functioning submarine. It could travel several meters below the surface, maintain breathable air with what Drebbel described as a chemical secret, and change buoyancy by adjusting ballast. In that moment, the impossible had become real, if only for a few hours beneath a muddy English river. The slow march of progress. Yet Drebbel's success faded quickly into obscurity. The world was not yet prepared for the idea of underwater travel. The 17th and 18th centuries were ages of discovery, but their explorers sailed above the surface, not beneath it. Ships of the line ruled the seas. The dream of the submarine belonged to eccentric minds in dusty workshops. Still, the idea refused to die. Every few decades, someone new would take up the challenge. In 1653, a German priest and polymath named Athanasius Kircher published a book containing detailed theories about submersible design, imagining metal hulls with air tubes and mechanical propulsion. Around the same time, an Englishman named John Wilkins, one of the founders of the Royal Society, wrote that underwater ships might one day go to any part of the world unseen, without discovery or disturbance. His words, poetic yet prophetic, hinted at the future of both wonder and war. The next great step came in the 18th century. As science advanced and the Industrial Revolution began to stir, materials improved and mechanical knowledge deepened. Inventors now had access to better tools, more precise measurements, and, perhaps most importantly, new motives. For the age of empire was also an age of conflict, and in times of war, even dreams could become weapons. The birth of a new weapon. In the 1770s, as the American colonies fought for independence from Britain, an inventor named David Bushnell brought the submarine into the realm of warfare. His creation, A small one-man vessel known as the Turtle was a strange and secretive contraption, shaped like a walnut, made of oak and barely large enough to hold a single operator. Propelled by hand-cranked propellers and powered only by human strength, it could dive and resurface by pumping water in and out of ballast tanks. The first practical use of such a system, Bushnell's mission was as daring as it was desperate. In 1776, under the cover of a night, the Turtle was sent to attack the British warship HMS Eagle, anchored in New York Harbor. The plan was to attach an explosive charge to the hull below the waterline, a feat no man had ever attempted. The pilot, Sergeant Ezra Lee, maneuvered beneath the great ship, fighting currents, darkness, and lack of air. He reached the target, but his drill couldn't pierce the copper sheathing of the Eagle's hull. Exhausted, he released the explosive charge and escaped. The bomb later detonated harmlessly in the water, but the message was clear. Humanity had entered a new dimension of warfare. Although the Turtle failed to sink its target, it succeeded in proving that a submarine could be used as a weapon. It was the first underwater combat mission in history, a fleeting, almost mythical event that hinted at things to come. From then on, navies around the world will keep a wary eye on the possibility of war from below. Between dream and reality. By the end of the eye chart, 18th century, the submarine was no longer a fantasy. It was a fragile reality, half science, half hope. Inventors had learned the basic principles of submersion, buoyancy, and propulsion. They had touched the threshold of a new world, but lacked the tools to truly enter it. The engines were weak, the air limited, the courage immense. Still, the idea persisted. A whisper beneath the waves, waiting for the age of iron and steam to give it strength. The dream of the hidden ship had survived the centuries. It had outlived its skeptics and endured its failures. The sea had been breached, not by myth, but by man. And in the century to come, as industry roared and empires grew, the submarine would finally rise, only to sink again, this time by design. By the dawn of the 19th century, the submarine was no longer a myth whispered among dreamers. It was a tangible idea, fragile, imperfect, but real. The age of wooden shells and candlelight experiments was giving way to an era of iron and steam. For the first time in history, the world possessed the materials and the engineering skill to transform the dream of underwater travel into something truly formidable. The seas, long thought unconquerable below the surface, were about to receive their first mechanical visitors. Robert Fulton and the Nautilus. The turning point came with the man whose name will be remembered in both steam and submarine history, Robert Fulton. An American inventor living in France during the early 1800s, Fulton had already made his mark by designing the world's first commercially successful steamboat. But his ambitions reached far deeper, literally. He believed that if humanity could navigate rivers with fire and machinery, then it could also command the silence of the sea. In 1800, with the support of Napoleon Bonaparte, Fulton began constructing a vessel that would embody this vision, the Nautilus. It was the first submarine designed with both scientific precision and practical purpose. The hull was made of copper sheets over iron ribs, a daring combination for the time, and measured about 21 feet in length. It was powered by hand-cranked propellers for submerged travel, and when surfaced, it could deploy a small collapsible sail. The Nautilus could submerge for several hours. thanks to air stored in copper tanks, and use adjustable ballast weights to dive or ascend. Fulton even designed a crude periscope, a tube fitted with glass lenses, allowing the crew to look above the surface while remaining hidden beneath it. For propulsion, it relied entirely on human muscle, a limitation that forced Fulton to think constantly of balance between endurance and stealth. In 1801, Fulton tested the Nautilus in the Seine River before a small group of astonished French officials. The vessel dived, remained submerged for over an hour, and reappeared downstream without a trace of distress. Later, he demonstrated it again in the open sea at Le Havre, where it successfully planted a mine on a target ship and detonated it remotely. Napoleon, intrigued but skeptical, ultimately refused to fund the project further. The French Navy saw little use for an unproven invention that operated in darkness and secrecy. Fulton, disappointed but undeterred, later offered his creation to the British government, who also rejected it. His dream sank with him, but his work laid the groundwork for every submarine that would follow. The Nautilus was gone, but the age of underwater engineering had begun. The rise of the iron innovators. The early decades of the 19th century were a period of experimentation where engineers across Europe and America sought to refine Fulton's vision. They studied how to sustain air supply, increase underwater endurance, and develop engines capable of operating without oxygen. In 1820, an English engineer named Simons proposed a steam-powered submersible, but the idea faltered. The problem was heat. Steam engines required oxygen to burn fuel, and in the closed world beneath the surface, air was life itself. The first significant leap came from the Spaniard Narciso Monturiol, a brilliant inventor and social reformer with a deep fascination for the sea. In 1859, he designed and built the Ictinio Y, followed by the larger and more advanced Ictinio II in 1864. These vessels, constructed in Barcelona, were among the most elegant and scientifically conceived submarines of the 19th century. The Ictinio II was an engineering marvel. 14 meters long, with a double hull made of olive wood reinforced by copper. Its propulsion system combined manual power with a chemical engine that generated steam without consuming oxygen, an ingenious solution that allowed for longer submersion times. Monturiol's submarine was capable of diving to depths of 30 meters and remaining below for several hours. Unlike his predecessors, Monturiol saw the submarine not as a weapon but as a tool for peaceful exploration, for harvesting coral, studying marine life, and mining underwater resources. In his writings, he described the submarine as a temple of science beneath the waves. Yet, despite his brilliance, funding was scarce. Spain, torn by political instability, had little interest in supporting scientific dreams. When Monturiol's private company went bankrupt, the Ictinio II was dismantled for scrap. Still, his ideas, double hulls, oxygen regeneration, and the concept of an independent underwater engine became cornerstones of future design. The era of military ambition. Elsewhere, the submarine's destiny was taking a more martial turn. In France, the engineer Brutus de Villeroy developed a small, hand-cranked submarine in 1858, which he later offered to the United States during the Civil War. Across the Atlantic, the Confederacy, desperate for an edge against the Union's naval blockade, began experimenting with underwater warfare. This effort produced one of the Most famous early submarines in history, the H.L. Hunley. Built in 1863 in Mobile, Alabama, the Hunley was a 40-foot-long iron tube with a crew of 8. Its propulsion came from a hand crank turned by 7 men, while the 8th operated controls and steering. At its bow, the Hunley carried a deadly innovation, a spar torpedo, essentially an explosive charge mounted on a long pole. On the night of February 17, 1864, the Hunley made history. It approached the Union warship USS Housatonic in Charleston Harbor and detonated its torpedo beneath the ship's hull. The explosion sank the Housatonic, making the Hunley the first submarine in history to destroy an enemy vessel in combat. Yet, triumph turned to tragedy. The Hunley itself was lost in the aftermath, her crew perishing in the silent darkness of the deep. The Hunley's sacrifice marked a grim but profound milestone. For the first time, humanity had used a machine to strike from beneath the surface, unseen, unstoppable, and deadly. The submarine had fulfilled its ancient prophecy. It had become the weapon of the invisible. From craft to industry. By the late 19th century, industrial progress began to catch up with imagination. Iron replaced wood, compressed air replaced crude pumps, and new propulsion systems emerged. In 1878, the Russian engineer Stefan Drzewiecki developed one of the first electrically powered submarines. By 1898, the American inventor John Philip Harland introduced a design that would shape the 20th century. Harland's submarine, powered by gasoline on the surface and electricity underwater, could dive and resurface with ease, maintain speed, and even launch self-propelled torpedoes. His Hollandse 6, adopted by the US Navy in 1900, became the prototype for all modern submarines, complete with periscopes, ballast tanks, and dual propulsion. In just 1 century, the submarine had evolved from a hand-cranked wooden barrel into a sophisticated war machine of iron and electricity. The dream that began with Leonardo da Vinci's pen and Drebel's leather-covered boat had become a reality of rivets, engines, and precision, the threshold of a new age. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world's major navies, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and the United States, were racing to develop their own fleets of submersible vessels. What had once been dismissed as a toy or a curiosity had become a central instrument of military power. The submarine was ready to leave the realm of experiments and enter the theater of history. Its next stage would not be in rivers or harbors, but in oceans, in battle, under fire, in the cold and crushing depths. The dream of invisibility had been achieved. The question that remained was how humanity would use it. The story of the submarine's evolution in the 19th century is one of persistence. An unbroken thread of ingenuity stretching across decades of failure and discovery. In each workshop, in every quiet harbor where inventors tested their strange, fish-like contraptions, a new piece of the puzzle fell into place. What began as a dream powered by muscle and hope would, by century's end, become a fully realized machine, driven by engines, guided by science, and capable of surviving the crushing darkness beneath the sea. The struggle for power. In the early decades of the 19th century, propulsion was the submarine's greatest challenge. The first vessels relied entirely on human effort. Hand cranks, pedals, and primitive screw propellers turned by the strength of the crew. These designs, while ingenious, could never generate the sustained power necessary for long voyages or deep dives. A new source of motion was needed. something that could move a vessel independently of human labor. Inventors across Europe sought the answer in the most transformative technology of their age, the steam engine. Steam had revolutionized factories, trains, and ships, so it seemed inevitable that it might conquer the underwater world as well. Yet the marriage between steam and the submarine was troubled from the start. Steam engines needed air to burn fuel and produce pressure, something the confined hull of a submersible could not easily provide. Moreover, the heat and exhaust posed lethal dangers in the closed environment of an underwater craft. Still, the idea was too powerful to ignore. Engineers began experimenting with hybrid systems where steam engines would operate on the surface to charge reserves of compressed air or power flywheels that could drive the vessel underwater for short periods. These designs were crude but visionary. The dream of mechanical propulsion beneath the waves was slowly taking shape. The rise of electric power. Then came the next great leap: electricity. By the mid-19th century, advances in batteries and wiring offered new possibilities. Electricity, silent and smokeless, seemed almost destined for underwater travel. The first to truly exploit it was Stefan Drzewiecki, a Polish-Russian engineer whose inventions in the 1870s and 1880s marked a turning point in submarine history. Drzewiecki's electric-powered submarines, built in Russia, were small and experimental, but they demonstrated principles that endure even today. His 1878 model was powered by an electric motor linked to storage batteries, eliminating the need for oxygen to sustain combustion. It could travel underwater for several hours, quietly and without producing telltale smoke. Later models could dive and surface using sophisticated ballast systems controlled by hand-operated valves and pumps. Drzewiecki's work inspired naval engineers across Europe. By the 1880s, both the French and Russian navies had begun testing electric submersibles for reconnaissance and harbor defense. For the first time, submarines were not merely curiosities. They were entering the lexicon of naval planning. Their silence, their invisibility, their ability to strike unseen, all these qualities made admirals take notice. Life beneath the surface. Yet even as propulsion improved, another challenge loomed: the human factor. Life inside a 19th century submarine was claustrophobic and perilous. Crews worked in darkness, breathing stale air that grew hotter and heavier with every passing minute. The problem of oxygen depletion became one of survival itself. Inventors experimented with chemical solutions, materials that could absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen. Though such systems were primitive and dangerous, Monturiol's chemical engine had already hinted at self-contained respiration, but it would take decades before submariners could remain submerged for extended periods without suffocating. Navigation posed another riddle. Without windows or reliable instruments, early submarines were essentially blind once they submerged. The invention of the periscope changed that. The earliest periscopes were simple tubes with angled mirrors, allowing the operator to see just above the surface. Over time, these evolved into complex optical systems with lenses, prisms, and rotating heads. Tools that transform submarines from blind creatures of the deep into precise instruments of reconnaissance, shaping the hull and the heart. As propulsion and vision improved, so too did the body of the submarine itself. Early designs had varied wildly: spheres, barrels, fish-like shapes. But by the late 19th century, builders began to understand the science of hydrodynamics. A sleek cylindrical form with pointed ends offered the least resistance underwater. The hull had to be strong enough to withstand immense pressure, yet light enough to float when needed. This led to the development of the double hull system, an innovation first pioneered by Monturiol and later perfected by naval engineers like John Philip Holland and Simon Lake. The outer hull provided streamlining and protection, while the inner hull maintained buoyancy and pressure resistance. Between them lay the ballast tanks, which could be filled with water to dive or emptied with compressed air to surface. Inside these evolving iron shells lay the heart of the submarine, its control systems. Levers, valves, gauges, and pumps. A delicate choreography of mechanics and human judgment. To dive safely, a commander needed to maintain perfect balance between buoyancy, depth, and trim. A mistake of inches could mean catastrophe. The early submariners, often inventors themselves, learned through trial and terror. Their courage bordered on the mythic, Holland and the triumph of modern design. It was in this crucible of invention that John Philip Holland, an Irish-born engineer working in the United States, forged the blueprint for the modern submarine. Holland's early experiments in the 1870s and 1880s combined all that had been learned. Streamlined hulls, dual propulsion systems, and internal control mechanisms that made underwater travel practical for the first time. His breakthrough came with the Holland VI, launched in 1897 and later accepted into service by the U.S. Navy in 1900 as the USS Holland. This vessel was revolutionary. On the surface, it used a gasoline engine. Underwater, it switched to electric motors powered by batteries. It could travel faster than any submersible before it, reach depths of over 70 feet, and fire self-propelled torpedoes from internal tubes. Another first. Holland's design set the standard for an entire generation of submarines. Within a few years, navies around the world, from Britain's Royal Navy to Imperial Japan, were adopting his principles. The submarine had matured from an eccentric experiment into a formidable machine of war. The coming of an age. By the close of the 19th century, the great dream had been fulfilled. The submarine could dive, travel, and fight beneath the waves. It was no longer powered by the muscles of desperate men, but by engines that combined the precision of engineering with the silent endurance of electricity. The sea, which had once seemed a grave to anything that sank, now concealed an entire new realm of movement and strategy. The early submariners were pioneers, part engineers, part explorers, part soldiers. They had risked everything to master a world without air, without light, without mercy. Their efforts had transformed a centuries-old fantasy into a new reality of steel, fire, and silence. But even as they celebrated their triumphs, the world was changing. Empires were arming, alliances were shifting, and whispers of conflict were growing louder. The submarine, born from curiosity and courage, was about to face its greatest test, war itself. As the 19th century drew to its close, the submarine, once a fragile curiosity of inventors and dreamers, was stepping onto the grand stage of naval warfare. No longer confined to the imagination of scientists or the sketches of visionaries, these strange iron fish now belonged to the world's navies. What had begun as the pursuit of exploration and stealth was transforming into something far more formidable, a new weapon of war, invisible and unstoppable beneath the waves. The first fleets of the deep. By the 1890s, the leading maritime powers of the world, Great Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and the United States, had all begun developing submarine programs. Each nation pursued its own vision, yet all shared a single understanding. The submarine could change the balance of naval power forever. France was among the first to see the potential of this new weapon. In 1888, it launched the Gymnote, a small electric-powered vessel designed for harbor defense. Sleek and compact, the Gymnote could dive, navigate, and fire a torpedo, a feat few believed possible. Its success inspired a wave of French experimentation, leading to more advanced designs like the Gustave Zédé and Narval, both of which introduced innovations such as double hulls and improved electric propulsion. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States was putting its faith in John Philip Holland's revolutionary ideas. His Holland VI had become the first practical combat-ready submarine, and in 1900 it officially entered service with the U.S. Navy as the USS Holland SS-1. Small by modern standards, just 53 feet long, carrying 6 men, it was nonetheless a marvel of engineering. With its gasoline engines for surface travel and electric motors for underwater operations, it represented the perfect synthesis of all previous submarine advances. Following America's lead, Britain, long the ruler of the seas, could not afford to ignore this new technology. In 1901, the Royal Navy purchased several Holland-type submarines from the United States and began developing its own designs. Germany soon followed, commissioning engineers to create vessels capable of long-range patrol and independent operation. By the first decade of the 20th century, the once marginal submarine had become a central feature of naval planning. Admirals, who had once dismissed it as unmanly and unseaworthy, now regarded it with a mix of fascination and dread. For they knew, though perhaps not yet fully, that beneath its quiet, compact frame lay a power that could bring entire fleets to ruin. The first submariner's life aboard these early submarines was unlike anything else in naval service. The men who volunteered, and they were always volunteers, entered a world of confinement, danger, and endless mechanical noise. They were part sailor, part engineer, part explorer, living in an environment where courage and precision were the only barriers between survival and death. The air was thick with oil and sweat. The temperature inside the steel hulls could soar as the engines ran, and when submerged, the silence was broken only by the hum of motors and the rhythmic drip of condensation. The space was so cramped that crewmen often had to sleep next to torpedoes. Yet, despite the claustrophobia and risk, these men felt a pride unmatched by their surface counterparts. They were pioneers of a new domain, the first humans to live and fight beneath the sea. Communication with the surface was nearly impossible, and each dive carried with it an unspoken understanding. What went down might never come up again. Accidents were common: leaks, battery fires, flooding, and the ever-present threat of suffocation. But the sense of mission was stronger still. They were the guardians of secrecy, the unseen eyes of their nations. A new kind of warfare. In the first years of the 20th century, the submarine's role was still uncertain. Many navies regarded it as a weapon for defense, ideal for protecting harbors and coastlines, but unsuited for open ocean operations. That perception would soon change. The first major test of the submarine in combat came during the Russo-Japanese War, 1904, 1905. Both sides deployed small fleets of submersibles, though they were used cautiously, more as scouts than as hunters. No significant submarine engagements occurred, yet the war served as a rehearsal for what was to come. The years that followed saw rapid progress. By 1910, submarines had grown larger, faster, and more capable of extended voyages. They could operate for days without surfacing, travel hundreds of miles, and launch self-propelled torpedoes with deadly accuracy. For the first time, they were ready not only to defend, but to strike. When World War I erupted in 1914, the submarine emerged as one of the most feared weapons ever devised. The Germans called theirs U-boats, short for Unterseeboote or undersea boats. To the world's navies, they represented a terrifying new reality. War had come to the depths. The U-boat Terror Germany entered the Great War with a fleet of just 20 operational submarines. Yet within months, these silent predators had changed the course of naval warfare. Operating from hidden bases along the North Sea and Atlantic coasts, the U-boats prowled beneath shipping lanes like wolves beneath ice. They struck suddenly and without warning, their periscopes gliding above the waves for only a moment before launching their deadly cargo. On September 22, 1914, a single German submarine, U-9, stunned the world. Within an hour, it sank 3 British cruisers, Aboukir, Hogue, and Cressy, sending more than 400 sailors to their deaths. The news spread like wildfire. The age of armored fleets and gallant sea battles was over. The ocean had turned into a realm of ghosts and shadows. The U-boats targeted not only warships but also merchant vessels, aiming to strangle Britain's vital supply routes. The policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, declared by Germany in 1915, shocked the world. Neutral ships, passenger liners, even hospital ships were no longer safe. When the RMS Lusitania was torpedoed and sunk that same year, killing nearly 200 civilians, outrage swept across nations. Yet the U-boats continued their campaign, sending thousands of tons of Allied shipping to the bottom every month. The surface navies struggled to respond. Destroyers and depth charges were introduced, but the U-boats were elusive. They could hide beneath the waves, attack unseen, and vanish before retaliation. The psychological effect was devastating. For the first time in history, the enemy could strike from an invisible world. The human element. Beneath the ocean's surface, life in a wartime submarine was a mixture of discipline and dread. Crews endured constant tension, knowing that a single leak, explosion, or depth charge could mean instant death. They navigated by instinct, sound, and memory, listening for the propellers of their prey through primitive hydrophones. When a submarine went on patrol, it entered another world, a place where sunlight and air were luxuries, where every creak of the hull reminded the men how fragile the sanctuary truly was. They lived in cycles of silence and violence, days of waiting, hours of stalking, seconds of chaos. And always there was the sea, pressing in, patient and merciless. The turning tide. By 1917, the Allies had learned to fight back. Convoy systems protected merchant ships, and new sonar technology allowed surface vessels to detect submerged enemies. Aircraft joined the hunt, forcing submarines to dive deeper and stay hidden longer. Slowly, the balance began to shift. By the end of World War I, over 5,000 Allied ships had been sunk by U-boats, but Germany's submarine losses were staggering too. More than half of its fleet destroyed and thousands of submariners lost to the depths. Yet the impact of the submarine was undeniable. It had rewritten the rules of naval combat. Battleships no longer ruled the waves. The true masters were those who could command the unseen. When peace finally returned in 1918, the world's nations were left with the haunting realization: the submarine, born from human curiosity, had become a weapon capable of invisible terror. It had changed not only warfare, but the psychology of the sea itself. By the time the guns of the First World War fell silent, the submarine had emerged as both a marvel and a menace. It had reshaped the very idea of naval warfare, transforming the ocean from a surface battlefield into a three-dimensional arena of unseen danger. In the years that followed, nations across the world studied the lessons learned from the conflict, and in doing so, they laid the foundations for the next, even more terrifying chapter of the submarine's history. Between the wars, a quiet revolution. Beneath the surface, the years between World War I and World War II were marked by a fragile peace, a silence filled with experimentation. Though the world spoke of disarmament and treaties, every major naval power continued to build and refine submarines in secret. The submarine was too valuable to abandon. Its very existence had proven that no empire, no fleet, no island was truly safe. In the 1920s, the designs grew larger, stronger, and more reliable. Engineers experimented with diesel-electric propulsion, combining the endurance of diesel engines on the surface with the silence of electric motors underwater. This breakthrough allowed submarines to stay submerged for longer periods and to operate more efficiently than ever before. The cramped, suffocating interiors of early vessels gave way to better ventilated, more habitable designs. Crew life was still difficult, but it was survivable. France developed its elegant Surcouf, the largest submarine of its time, equipped with deck guns and even a small seaplane for reconnaissance. Britain built the sturdy O-class and P-class boats for imperial patrols. The United States perfected long-range oceanic submarines, capable of crossing the vast Pacific. Japan, studying foreign designs, created underwater cruisers meant to serve its growing ambitions in the East. And in the depths of post-war Germany, though forbidden by treaty, engineers continued to sketch and dream in secret, laying plans for the vessels that would one day return under a new flag. During these years, submarines began to take on a dual identity, part weapon, part scientific instrument. Some explored the deep sea, conducting early research in marine geology and biology. The boundary between peace and war blurred, as the same technology that could destroy also promised discovery. World War II, the ocean becomes a battlefield. When the Second World War erupted in 1939, the submarine once again became the silent weapon of nations. Now faster, deadlier, and far more autonomous, these new underwater vessels roamed every ocean. And once again, it was Germany that unleashed the most formidable threat, the U-boat arm, reborn under Admiral Karl Donitz. The U-boats of World War II were the inheritors of decades of refinement. Powered by diesel-electric engines, armed with multiple torpedo tubes, and capable of diving to unprecedented depths, they struck with terrifying efficiency. In the early years of the war, they dominated the Atlantic, forming what Donitz called the wolf packs, coordinated groups of submarines that hunted Allied convoys by night. From 1940 to 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic became the longest continuous campaign of the war. Merchant ships carrying food, oil, and munitions from North America to Britain found themselves stalked by unseen predators. Torpedoes struck without warning. Ships vanished into the dark. For the sailors who served on those convoys, the ocean itself seemed alive with threat. The human stories of the U-boat crews were equally haunting. Young men, often barely out of training, lived for weeks in the narrow steel corridors of their vessels. The air thick with diesel fumes, the temperature rising, condensation dripping from every surface. When depth charges exploded above them, they lay in silence, counting the seconds between detonations, praying that the next would not be their end. The sea around them was both sanctuary and grave. By 1943, however, the tide began to turn. Advances in radar, sonar, and long-range aircraft gave the Allies the ability to detect and destroy submarines before they could strike. The hunter became the hunted. U-boats that once roamed freely now found themselves trapped in an invisible cage of technology. By war's end, of the 40,000 German submariners who had served, more than 30,000 were dead, a casualty rate unmatched by any other branch of service. Yet their legacy was profound. The war had proven the submarine to be a decisive instrument of strategy, not merely an auxiliary weapon, but a tool capable of shaping the fate of nations. American and Allied triumphs beneath the Pacific. While the Atlantic convoys fought for survival, another submarine war raged in the vast Pacific. There, the United States Navy deployed its fleet submarines against Japan's maritime lifelines. In the early months of the war, American crews struggled with faulty torpedoes and outdated tactics. But by 1944, improvements in technology and training had transformed them into a devastating force. Operating from bases in Australia, Hawaii, and Guam, American submarines sank more than half of Japan's merchant fleet and a significant portion of its navy. The once mighty empire of Japan was slowly strangled by an unseen hand beneath the sea. Famous vessels such as the USS Tang, USS Wahoo, and USS Barb became legends of silent warfare, their crews regarded as both hunters and heroes. The experiences of these men mirrored those of their enemies: long patrols, constant danger, and the loneliness of the deep. They lived in perpetual twilight, submerged by day, surfacing only at night to recharge their batteries, breathe fresh air, and send coded reports back to command. Every dive carried with it the unspoken understanding that they might never see the sky again. Disaster and mystery in the depths. The history of submarines is also a chronicle of tragedy. The ocean is a patient and unforgiving adversary, and for every success beneath the waves, there were disasters that claimed ships and crews without warning. During World War II alone, hundreds of submarines from every nation disappeared, leaving behind no trace but a name and a memory. Some were destroyed in battle, others succumbed to mechanical failure, leaks, or explosions. For the families of those lost, there was rarely closure. The sea keeps its secrets well. Even in peacetime, the dangers remained. In 1963, long after the wars had ended, the American nuclear submarine USS Thresher was lost during deep diving trials, taking 129 men to the bottom of the Atlantic. The cause was a chain of small malfunctions, a valve, a circuit, a flood, proving once again that beneath the surface, perfection was survival. The tragedy led to a complete overhaul of submarine safety standards worldwide. The ocean floor is littered with the wrecks of these vessels, silent tombs of iron and courage. Some have been found, their stories finally illuminated by modern exploration. Others remain missing, resting in darkness, the last witnesses to humanity's endless struggle with the deep. Legends and symbolism. From the first sketches of Leonardo da Vinci to the high-tech submarines of the 20th century, the vessel that dives has always carried a peculiar symbolism. It is both human and inhuman, heroic and monstrous, a creation that allows mankind to enter an element not its own. Writers and artists have long been drawn to its mystery. Jules Verne, in his 1870 novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, transformed the submarine from a machine into a myth. His Nautilus, commanded by the enigmatic Captain Nemo, became the embodiment of human defiance. The dream of living free from the world above, mastering both nature and isolation. Verne's vision predated the real submarines that would soon prowl the oceans, yet his influence was so profound that engineers later named their own vessels in tribute. In the 20th century, films, novels, and folklore turned submarines into symbols of tension, courage, and tragedy. Stories like Das Boot and Run Silent, Run Deep revealed the human side of the deep, the sweat, the fear, the bravery in silence. In popular imagination, the submarine came to represent not merely technology, but the soul's descent into the unknown, a place where courage meets confinement and man confronts the enormity of the sea. The Cold War awakening. By 1945, the submarine had once again changed form. From diesel and battery, it moved toward nuclear power, and from torpedoes to ballistic missiles. Nations that once fought now raced to fill the oceans with silent, nuclear-armed leviathans. These new submarines were larger than any before them, capable of remaining submerged for months at a time, powered by reactors that turned the heat of atoms into endless motion. Yet even in this new atomic age, the echoes of the past remained. The engineers of the Cold War still owed their craft to the dreamers of the Renaissance and the inventors of the 19th century. The same principles of buoyancy, pressure, and balance still governed their ships, and the same courage still guided the men who took them into the depths. The submarine had finally achieved what its earliest creators could only imagine: complete independence from the surface world. It could travel around the globe without ever surfacing, unseen by radar, unheard by the human ear. Humanity's ancient wish to move beneath the sea had at last been fulfilled, but at a cost measured not only in lives but in fear. When the first submarines slipped beneath the water, they carried with them more than machinery. They carried dreams, fears, and symbols as old as the sea itself. From the beginning, they belonged as much to imagination as to engineering. Even as they became instruments of war and strategy, their image lived in stories, films, and collective memory. The submarine, perhaps more than any other invention of the modern world, speaks directly to something timeless in the human soul: our longing to explore the unknown and our quiet terror of what lies beneath. The birth of a myth. Long before the submarine was built, it already existed in legend. Humanity has always dreamed of descending beneath the waves. Ancient tales tell of sea gods in their chariots, of heroes seeking hidden realms, of monsters that lurk in the depths. The first inventors, Leonardo da Vinci, Drebbel, Bushnell, did not simply build machines. They awakened an archetype. Their vessels were modern echoes of mythic descent, journeys into the forbidden element. In the 19th century, as real submarines began to emerge, art and literature turned the idea into something almost sacred. Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, 1870, was more than a novel. It was a prophecy. His Nautilus, sleek, silent, and illuminated from within, was both a marvel of technology and a vessel of the human spirit. It moved freely through a world where no ship had sailed, guided by a man who had turned his back on the surface. Captain Nemo was at once scientist, explorer, and exile, a man who sought refuge in the sea, wielding technology as both shield and revenge. His creation, though fictional, became the blueprint for all submarines that followed. Engineers from France to America openly admitted that Verne's descriptions inspired their designs. In this sense, the submarine was born twice, once in fiction and once in metal. Between wonder and fear. Throughout the 20th century, the submarine maintained this strange duality. To some, it was a triumph of progress, proof that humanity could master even the most hostile environment. To others, it was a symbol of dread, a reminder that beneath calm waters could lurk silent death. This tension between awe and anxiety gave rise to an entire genre of storytelling. In the aftermath of World War I, poets and writers described the submarine as both heroic and haunted. Newspapers portrayed submariners as men who lived in the belly of the beast, risking suffocation and madness for duty. Yet these same men were also admired for their courage. In their cramped iron shells, they embodied the new kind of heroism that defined the modern age. Not loud, not glorious, but silent, precise, and enduring. Cinema soon took up the story. Early documentaries like Men of the Submarine, 1928, portrayed the harsh daily life of crews, while later films, Das Boot, Run Silent, Run Deep, The Enemy Below, transformed those struggles into enduring cultural images. The camera's slow movement through narrow corridors, the sweat, the breathing, the sound of depth charges exploding above. These became part of the visual language of modern warfare. Even today, few images convey suspense and confinement like the flicker of red lights inside a submarine, the faint creak of metal under pressure, the distant ping of sonar. Symbols of nations and eras. Every country that built submarines found in them something of its own character. For the United States, the submarine became a symbol of stealth and endurance, a guardian of freedom that prowled unseen to deter enemies during the Cold War. The USS Nautilus, the first nuclear-powered submarine, launched in 1954, carried that symbolism even in its name, directly invoking Verne's fictional vessel. When it sailed beneath the Arctic ice to reach the North Pole in 1958, it seemed to complete the prophecy of its literary ancestor. The submarine had truly conquered the world beneath the waves. For Germany, the submarine was a story of pride and tragedy. From the early triumphs of the U-boats to their devastating losses in both world wars. The image of the U-boat crew, trapped in silence and hunted in the deep, became one of the most enduring symbols of the nation's 20th century history. Bravery entangled with despair. For the Soviet Union, the submarine became the embodiment of its Cold War philosophy. Secrecy, endurance, and power hidden beneath the surface. Soviet engineers built submarines not merely as weapons, but as monuments to national identity. The massive Typhoon class, launched in the 1980s, was a floating fortress of steel, the largest submarine ever constructed, its twin hulls enclosing a world unto themselves. Each of these nations projected its spirit into the depths, and beneath all their differences lay the same idea: that the submarine was the modern equivalent of the ancient dragon, a creature of the abyss, feared yet revered, invisible yet all-powerful. The human face. Beneath the iron, beneath the myth and the machinery, the human element has always remained central. The men, and later, women who served aboard submarines, became a distinct kind of seafarer, one whose courage was measured not in battles fought openly, but in the endurance of silence. Life inside a submarine was its own universe. The air was filtered and recycled. Days and nights blurred together. Sleep came in narrow bunks beside humming machinery. For weeks at a time, crews lived without sunlight, trusting their vessel to separate them from oblivion by mere inches of metal. Friendships forged in such conditions were unbreakable. Submariners spoke of their boats not as machines, but as living beings, entities that breathed, moaned, and protected them. Even in peace, the risks remained. Many submarines were lost in training accidents to unseen leaks or malfunctions deep below. Yet those who served continued to volunteer, drawn by something that outsiders could rarely understand. A calling to the deep, a fascination with the strange equilibrium between danger and calm, exploration and science. As the 20th century progressed, the submarine's legacy expanded beyond war. The same technology that had once been used for destruction became a gateway to discovery. Specialized research submarines like Bathyscaphe Trieste and Alvin carried scientists to depths once thought unreachable. In 1960, Jacques Picard and Don Walsh descended aboard the Trieste to the Challenger Deep, nearly 11,000 meters below the surface, the deepest point on Earth. There, in total darkness and crushing pressure, they saw living creatures drifting in silence, proving that even the planet's most extreme environments teemed with life. Later, Alvin, a small, maneuverable research submersible, explored the wreck of the Titanic and hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, revealing ecosystems that had existed unseen for millions of years. In these missions, the submarine once again became a vessel of wonder, fulfilling Leonardo's ancient dream of exploring the hidden world beneath the waves, not as conqueror, but as student. In the mind of humanity, even now, the submarine remains a potent metaphor. In psychology, it represents the hidden self, the unconscious mind that moves silently beneath the surface of thought. In politics, it symbolizes secrecy and deterrence. In art, it continues to stand for both confinement and transcendence, a place where human will confronts the immensity of nature. Museums across the world preserve old submarines as relics of courage and warning. Visitors walk their narrow corridors, listen to recordings of creaking hulls, and feel a chill that is not only historical, but primal. In these steel chambers, they sense something eternal, the boundary between human ambition and the vastness of the unknown, from fear to reverence. Over the centuries, the submarine has transformed from an object of fear into a monument of perseverance. What began as a dangerous experiment now represents one of humanity's greatest triumphs. The ability to live and move in a world once thought untouchable. Yet it has also forced us to confront the limits of our power. Every advance beneath the surface has carried a reminder of how small we remain in the face of the sea. In the hum of modern reactors and the glow of sonar screens, there is still an echo of the oars that propelled Drebel's wooden craft through the Thames 4 centuries ago. The same curiosity that drove him, and those who followed, continues to pull us downward, into silence, into discovery, into the deep. If one were to listen closely at the edge of the sea, beneath the cry of gulls and the roll of waves, one might still hear it, a faint rhythmic pulse beneath the water. It is not the sound of nature, nor of the tide, but of humanity itself, the heartbeat of a dream that began centuries ago. The submarine, born from the marriage of imagination and engineering, remains one of the most haunting symbols of our relationship with the unknown. It is both our greatest expression of courage and our most solemn whisper of humility. For thousands of years, the ocean had kept its secrets. It was the last wide mystery, untamed, unknowable, indifferent to the affairs of humankind. Then, slowly, through vision and persistence, we found a way to slip beneath its surface. The journey was long, fragile, and often fatal. Wooden frames gave way to iron hulls, hand-cranked propellers to electric motors, and the dream of invisibility became a reality of steel and silence. Each generation of inventors and sailors added a layer to this story. Leonardo da Vinci with his drawings, Drebbel with his oars, Bushnell and Fulton with their brave prototypes, Holland with his engines, and the submariners who followed them into darkness. They were explorers not of geography alone, but of possibility. Every descent they made was a gesture of faith. Faith in the machine, in the human mind, in the belief that there is always something more to be discovered if one dares to go deeper. The submarine changed our world in ways both visible and invisible. It reshaped warfare, yes, but it also reshaped how we think of the sea itself. No longer was it merely a barrier to be crossed. It became a dimension to be entered, a realm to be studied, and in some measure understood. It turned the ocean from a mystery into a map, and yet, paradoxically, made that mystery feel even greater. For the more we descended, the more we realized how little we truly knew. There is a peculiar peace in the image of a submarine drifting through the deep, a shadow gliding through twilight waters, unseen by the world above. It represents the solitude of human exploration, the quiet persistence that has carried us from the first rafts of reed and wood to vessels that can circle the globe without ever surfacing. Beneath its metal hull lies a simple truth: that curiosity, even when tempered by fear, is stronger than fear itself. And still, the submarine evolves. In the modern age, nuclear power has freed it from the need for air or sunlight. Today's submarines can remain submerged for months, circling silently through oceans, guided by satellites and computers. They carry weapons powerful enough to end civilizations, yet they also conduct missions of science, rescue, and observation. The contrast is stark. The same machine capable of annihilation can also reveal the beauty of coral reefs or the mysteries of hydrothermal vents. In the vastness of the sea, the submarine has become a mirror of humanity. Our ingenuity, our contradictions, our desire to reach further than wisdom sometimes allows. It embodies both creation and destruction, both knowledge and isolation. To look upon one is to see the very paradox of progress, that every time we learn to master a new element, we must also learn to live with its consequences. Yet even with all our machines and all our maps, the ocean remains untamed. Beneath its calm surface lies an eternity of darkness and pressure, an alien world that humbles us still. And perhaps that is as it should be. For without mystery there is no wonder, without risk no discovery. The submarine does not conquer the sea, it coexists with it, navigating its silence like a guest in a vast cathedral. It is easy to think of submarines only as weapons or relics, but to those who have stood upon their decks, felt their descent, and listened to the creak of their hulls as they sink into the cold, they are something more. They are living symbols of humanity's restless spirit. To descend beneath the waves is to enter a place where noise and pride vanish, where every heartbeat is magnified, and where one feels, more than anywhere else on earth, the smallness and greatness of being alive. So the story ends as it began, with a dream drawn in ink upon old parchment, imagined by artists, built by engineers, and carried forward by those who dare to go where no light can reach. It is the dream of the hidden journey, the descent into the unknown, and the quiet triumph of returning to tell the tale. And as long as there are oceans, and as long as there are those who look upon them and wonder, that dream will never end. Somewhere in the dark expanse below, a submarine moves silently through the water, its lights glowing faintly in the abyss, its engines humming softly like the heartbeat of the earth itself. It doesn't announce its presence, nor seek glory. It simply endures, a vessel of iron, of mystery, and of memory. A reminder that even in the deepest silence, humanity still dares to dream.